Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. More ClodBuster again this week, and the old Proline body we have at the moment, while it's functional, it's a bit beaten up and full of holes. Not really what we want. To replace it, I have this. It's a J Concepts F250 with the fast back and the visor parts. I looked at Proline selection and didn't really see anything that tickled my fancy. I wanted an older Chevy or Ford truck in a longer wheelbase. Other than trying to find discontinued bodies, there really wasn't anything I liked. Here we are then, one clear Ford F250. It's licensed, so it's got all the Ford branding. There's a fair amount of detail, but not quite as much as the current Prolines, and of course nowhere near some of the Tamiyas. But I think for a monster truck, where the bodies on the full-size ones tend to be something like fiberglass with stickers, it's going to be just fine. In the accessories bag, we've got the visor, which just sticks down above the windscreen, and we've got the fastback that sits behind the cab. All very nice bits made from a surprisingly thick plastic, so they should survive a few rolls without cracking or ripping. Next we have the nice flyer with the J Concepts social media links on one side, and there's a paint guide on the other. Good to see. Last out we have the window masks, which look like that nice stretchy masking material, and we have the decal sheet. They're high quality with lots of detail, and just like the body, have the proper Ford logos. They'll do very nicely. To get the body ready, there's a few things we're going to need to do. As always with things like this, everyone has their favourite method. This is just how I tend to approach things. First then, I use a fine tip marker, otherwise known as a Sharpie, to draw around the cut lines. The shell has a peel-off film, so after we're done with the painting, the line will disappear. It makes it so much easier to follow the line, otherwise you end up trying to get the light just right to see where you're going while wielding scissors or a knife. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect, it's literally just a guide. Next, we cut the skirt away from the bottom of the body, keeping a bit of a buffer between the scissors and the cut line. This will make the bottom edge of the body a lot more flexible, making it easier to get around the corners. Then we go around again, trimming to the line, but we skip the wheel arches. The fastback and the visor are similar, but way more fiddly. I tend to cut the bulk of the plastic away with scissors, then go in with a Dremel and a small round bit to trim away the rest. It's a bit risky, as one slip and you can seriously scratch up the surface, but as long as you're careful, it's quite doable. For the arches then, we use the scissors to cut right up to the line from the edge. Then we use a sharp knife to score along the line. You see, Lexan or polycarbonate responds very well to scoring and snapping. If we try to snap it now, we'd probably end up ripping the plastic, so we need to divide the arch up into 3 or 4 sections with the scissors, cutting up to or just shy of the line. Now we just snap out the sections, and the worst case is you'll end up with some little bits sticking out between the sections, but they can be Dremeled, sanded or cut ever so easily. Next we need to sort out the mounting holes. Now the chassis uses side-mounted posts, so the holes end up on the side of the body, which really isn't my favourite method. Because of the way vac form bodies are made, the sides tend to be fairly thin, especially towards the bottom, which really isn't great when you roll over and the entire weight of the truck is on the posts. But when the chassis is this short, there's not really much else you can do without adding lots of structure to the top for normal vertical body posts. Not only would that add high up weight, but it wouldn't look all that good either. I'm going to try and position the body where it wants to end up. Now I did end up mounting it a bit too far forward in the end, so measure twice, cut once and all that. It's a bit of a pain, but I think if we extend the wheelbase one set of holes, it's going to balance out. You'll get the idea later in the video. Anyway, with the body roughly where I wanted it, I used a Sharpie again to mark a couple of guide dots where the posts go. The prototype side reinforcement parts I made up will work really well as templates. It's just a flat part with 8mm post holes 100mm apart. All we need to do is hold it over the mark we made for the post, make it level with the line along the side of the body, and draw around the holes. Very easy, and it's going to be a perfect fit. Now for the other side we need to transfer the dimensions. We will use the line for the rear of the door as an origin point and measure to the rear hole centre. Flip the body around and measure from the origin point to where the hole wants to go. Use the reinforcement piece again, making sure it's straight and level, and mark the holes. Now we just mark the centres, drill them out and pop the body back on the chassis. You can already see that the front's sticking out a bit more than it should, but hey ho, you can't undrill holes. Otherwise, there's enough clearance around the tyres, we shouldn't get any major rub. I think it's only going to be an issue if we land a jump on one of the front wheels with a bit of turn on. Next up, we've got the Mark II of the side reinforcements. This time we've got 2 extra lugs on the ends with a screw hole and an extra hole in the middle. The idea being it's going to help keep the side of the body from tearing. It's a bit of an experiment, so it's going to be interesting to see if it actually helps. Getting it to fit is quite easy. We just hold it up against the side with the body on the chassis and poke a 2.5mm drill bit through the holes and give them a quick spin. The point will mark the surface enough that we'll be able to see where to drill. We just need to use a punch to spot the centres so the drill doesn't wander and drill them out to 3mm. Next we're going to use some M3x6s to attach the reinforcement plate to the inside of the body. Not doing the screws up too tight though. If we crush the plastic, it'll make it more likely to crack. We just want to do them up tight enough so they're snug, so there's no wobbling about going on. Now we can use some body clips to attach the body to the chassis and check the fit. Now I think other than it being a bit far forward, I think it looks pretty good. Now we're happy with it, we can wash it using dish soap and a soft brush, rinse it thoroughly to get the soap out and let it dry. Stick the window masks on, add any custom masking and spray a bit of paint around. You should end up with something that looks a bit like this. Now I use Core RC paint as usual. The black, blue and the window tint are from the remains of previous builds, so all I had to buy specifically for this one was a new can of white paint. I think it came out quite nicely. The only disappointment I had was after spraying a couple of coats of white, some grey marks became apparent on the top of the roof and the tailgate. It looks like something was sprayed on the body at the factory that dried. Despite a very thorough wash, there's no signs of the soapy water affecting the marks. Any other colour than white, and they probably wouldn't have even shown up. Now I did manage to lessen them a little by sanding through the white paint and taking some of the plastic surface down, but it was very difficult to see what I was doing without the paint. Still, from a distance you'll never know, and once the body sees some mud and scratches, it's really not going to matter. Next then, we need to stick some decals on. We'll use the grill as a bit of an example. Now I tend to use a small pair of scissors to roughly cut the decal out from the sheet so it's a bit easier to handle, then go around again cutting right up to the edge, or just leaving a fraction of a millimetre. The decals with a complex shape, like text, unless you really want to go crazy, you don't want to cut the letters out individually, so you trim them out in one block, keeping the space between the parts. Before we stick the decals on, we need to peel back the overspray film. You really don't want to forget that. Not only is the plastic under the film always pleasingly perfectly shiny, but if you do stick the decals to the outside, you'll probably never forgive yourself. I still have the first body I ever painted on my own, a Kyosho Alfa Romeo, with all its livery decals carefully placed on the overspray film. The funny part of it is, I didn't even notice for years until it started to peel up at the edges. To stick the grill down, we're going to peel the backing up just a little bit and cut a strip off the end. That'll let us position the decal by sliding it around on the backing, then pressing down the exposed part. Then, when it's absolutely spot on, we can peel the rest of the backing off and smooth down the decal. There's a few other methods, of course. I know people who just peel the lot off and always get decals perfect. When I try that, I always end up with the decals at a slight angle. Also, you can buy bottles of stuff that you spray around and the decal floats on the top, which can make things very easy. But there's a bit of extra cleanup to deal with, so it's more useful for really huge sheets on full-size vehicles and windows. All we need to do now is stick the decals onto the body one by one. Now I tend to start using the scale bit, so the lights and the grills, then size up whether I want to add any extras. In the case of this body though, we've also got the fastback and the visor, so we're going to fit those next. I'm just going to use some servo tape to stick them down. It'll stick fairly well, but it's still flexible and it should peel off before the plastic tears in a really bad crash. Using a few strips where the part contacts the body is all we need, and you don't really want any exposed sticky if you can help it. It'll attack grass and other rubbish, making a bit of a mess. We just need to peel the backing off and stick the parts down. The fastback at the back and the visor at the front. Very nice. Now we could stop here, but I feel like a monster truck, it should have a few extra decals. We've got the ones that came with the body, but I've also got a collection of spares from other builds that we can go through. I found one sheet from a Kyosho Ford Focus that might be useful. There's loads more too. I'm still going to try and keep it simple and clean, but just add a few to break things up. And there we go. I only added a couple, but I think it still looks fairly clean. Importantly though, I found the remains of a ClodBuster decal sheet with the 4x4x4 decals, which I think is fitting, keeping a bit of the Clod theme going between the axles and the body. On the back, just to break up the white, I added a Ford logo. I would rather have just had the Ford letters, but it'll do the job. Last thing to do then, we need to refit the reinforcement panels. I've got some nice stainless washer head screws now, so it'll look a bit better with the light colours, and the washer heads will hopefully spread a bit of the load. After the 6 screws are in, we can offer the body up to the chassis and clip in the 4 body clips and admire our work. From the side it does look a bit goofy with the front hanging out so far, which is a shame and purely my fault of course, but when we turn it a bit it all comes together. I think the mistake I made was I didn't spend enough time adjusting the body on the chassis to get it spot on. But in my defence, I do have a very large camera on a tripod between me and the truck, which makes things a bit awkward at the best of times. There's no changes to the chassis of course, so the truck isn't going to behave any differently to the last time, so it's still just as sharp and a lot of fun to drive. I'm tempted to grab another body and paint it up off camera so I can be a bit more careful positioning it. But first we will have a try at extending the wheelbase a hole at the front and the back and see how it looks. We're not racing, so I'm not too worried about the difference in performance, and hopefully it will fit in the boot of my car, but it's already a bit of a tight fit. As usual then, I'll put the rest of the bashing about in another video at 50 frames a second. Making the 2 videos saves me a good hour or so of upload time, as I can make the build a lower bitrate and it still looks just fine. The fast movement driving the trucks around really benefits from more bits though. Anyway, that's it for this week then. There will be a link to the driving in the description. And as always, thanks for watching. Like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!